I guess we'll start with the title conservative. I've seen that a lot on your website. You talked about calling yourself the most accomplished conservative. You have endorsements from conservative leaders. You have a section that says Michael Roberson delivering conservative reforms. It seems like that's a really important thing for you to be considered a conservative. Is it?
Well, I think it's reality when you look at my record. This last session, I sponsored and passed the most comprehensive collective bargaining bill in the history of the state. I sponsored and passed the most comprehensive PERS reform in the history of this state. I sponsored and passed 6 different tort reform bills. I and the governor and the legislature cut $500 million out of state government spending in 2011, the most in the country on a percentage basis. So, and then you get into the education reform. The most conservative education reform in the entire country, school choice, decentralization of the 5th largest school district, new accountability measures. So, oh, and by the way, I sponsored and passed the most comprehensive Second Amendment legislation last session, expanding law-abiding gun owners' gun rights.
Now, obviously, you're running in a Republican primary, and so being thought of as a conservative is helpful to you at this moment. Do you worry that you might alienate some independents or even some Democrats? Because I could see people in those parties, you know, considering you for their vote in the general election.
Well, I hope to obtain their vote in the general election, and I think I should. I'm a problem solver. I've gotten things done, and I think that's the problem people have with Washington. They don't see anyone in Washington doing anything, and I've led the effort to actually get things done in Carson City. I'm a mainstream, pragmatic conservative, excuse me.
Let's talk about probably the number one issue that's come up so far in this election, and that's taxes. The centerpiece of the governor's education reform was also funding, getting the right money to the right programs to hopefully achieve the right results. And one of that was this tax package, which made some temporary taxes permanent and introduced a commerce tax, first time in the history of the state of Nevada, a tax on business revenue. It's been talked about for years. It never happened until the 2015 session. First, let me ask you, any regrets about your role? This literally could not have happened without Michael Roberson. Do you have any regrets about it?
No, I'm proud of what we did last session. I'm proud to have led the effort to support Governor Sandoval's agenda. You know, as Governor Sandoval says, it's not conservative to have one of the worst education systems in the country. It's not conservative to be in a situation where you don't have enough seats for kids to sit in schools. Every economic development expert in the state came to us last session and they said, listen, it's great you have a low tax environment here in Nevada, but until you improve your education system, improve the level of the skilled workforce you have here in Nevada, you will never be able to truly diversify the economy and bring businesses into the state. And in fact, they quantified that 35% of all the businesses who want to come to Nevada ultimately don't because of our poor education system and a lack of a highly skilled workforce. Now,
do you think any of those businesses will not come to Nevada because of the implementation of a tax on business revenue of more than $4 million?
Of course not, and that's because context is important. Even after the important tax reform we passed last session, we are ranked as the 5th best state in the country for business taxes. We have the 5th lowest business taxes in the country. Every Republican governor that you saw running for president this past year, all but one of them had Republican legislatures to work with. And every single one of those states has higher business taxes than Nevada does. We're 5th best in the country.
Yeah.
And when you look at the taxes, the tax reform that we passed, one of the larger portions of it, you know, people talk about the commerce tax, but we raised taxes on cigarettes, $1 a pack for cigarettes to fund education. No one's talking about that because I don't think very many people think that's a bad idea.
No, you just lost the smoker vote, but in terms though of that tax,
yeah.
You've been attacked by that. Some of your opponents who have pledged that they will never raise taxes ever under any circumstances. They have said it's just not conservative to raise taxes.
But Steve, when you're in a position of leadership and a position of responsibility, you've got to pay for things, okay? If you want a good school system, you have to pay for it. Now, I'm not one that believes you just throw money at a problem. That's not what we did. We completely overhauled the way we fund education in this state. We put in third-party accountability measures. We put in benchmarks that have to be met. We put all the new education money in silos, in categorical funding programs that are going to go to the classroom, and we walled that money off from collective bargaining. And we paired it with the most conservative and expansive education reform of any state in the history of this country.
Do you think that, you know, a lot of people, you'll see these comments on the internet, certainly I've seen a lot of them, well, you can't fix it by just throwing money at it. You just mentioned that these programs have been designed so that their individual programs are funded. It's not money just going into the general system, and that there are benchmarks to measure success. Do you think that after 4 years maybe, we'll be able to look back on these reforms and say, this money that these programs that were passed have improved education, and here's the demonstrable results in test scores, graduation rates, et cetera?
I absolutely believe that, and we are going to see that. Now, this is a long-term proposition, right? You're not going to completely transform your school district and take it from one of the worst in the country to one of the best in 4 years. But I do think we're going to see demonstrable improvement in a wide variety of areas in education. And you know, people talk about the commerce tax. The primary reason the commerce tax was implemented was because we had lots of large out-of-state companies who they didn't have a physical presence here. They didn't have employees here. They sold their goods into the state, many times cheap Chinese goods into the state. And in many of those cases, they paid absolutely nothing. Although they paid in just about every other state they did business in, they didn't pay here. So what we did is we charged a tax that averages out to 0.16% of their revenue generated in Nevada above $4 million. So once they hit $4 million, and there aren't very many companies like that, 1% of all companies that do business in Nevada will pay this. They will pay about $1,000 for every $1 million of revenue above that $4 million threshold. Small businesses are exempt. And so what we've done...
Should they be, though? I mean, shouldn't we all participate? You know, you and I both pay. We pay when we buy gas, when we buy any items at Target or whatever. We pay to maintain a good school system because we benefit from it. Shouldn't all businesses?
Well, small businesses that have payroll in this state pay the modified business tax, the payroll tax. And we wanted to level the playing field between these large out-of-state businesses and these local, small Nevada businesses. And in fact, this commerce tax exempts exports. So if you're a small business in Nevada, you produce a good or service and ship it out of state, you sell it to customers out of state, that's not calculated as Nevada revenue, which would be subject to this commerce tax. So what we've done is we've given a competitive advantage to small local businesses in this state. I think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah. A last question on this topic. It's almost been cemented in the public mind because of 40, 50 years of rhetoric from Barry Goldwater to the present day that conservative means anti-tax. It seems to me you're trying to kind of redefine that term to basically say, no, that's not necessarily true. Conservatives can embrace taxes if it is done in the right way, directed to the right purpose, and fair to the entities that are being taxed. Is that accurate? Am I right with that?
Well, I think there needs to be a balance, and again, it's about context. We have no personal income tax. We have no corporate income tax. There were those...
No, we do now, though, don't we, with the commerce tax?
No, it's not a corporate income tax. There's no Nevada IRS. In fact, that's one of the reasons we did not create a corporate net income tax, because there were those pushing that. There were others from out of state pushing a sales tax on services that would have hurt consumers here in this state. Let's say someone wants to get a haircut or get their nails done, any kind of service you can think of.
Haircuts like, but, yeah.
They would have to pay a services tax. And we said no to that. There were others, and there's many in local government that want to take the caps off property taxes. We said no to that. In fact, we passed a bill to lock property tax caps into the state constitution.
Yeah.
So We looked out for small business owners. We looked out for individual Nevadans. We looked out for Nevada families. And yeah, we asked large out-of-state corporations to pay a little bit, to pay something into Nevada to fund education. So I'm proud of that. And I'll tell you, again, we are the 5th lowest business tax state in the country, and I've been endorsed by the United States Chamber of Commerce. I'm told by them this is the only open seat contested primary for a House race in the country that they've endorsed in. And as you know, the U.S. Chamber is the voice of business in this country. They represent over 3 million businesses.
I said it was the last question. Actually, I lied. That was the next to last. This will be the last one on this subject, and that is, you haven't always had this view. I mean, when you started your career, you signed the tax pledge that said you weren't going to raise taxes. You changed your mind on that. Why?
Absolutely, because once you actually serve on the Finance Committee and you take a look at the budget and you see that even after this session, Nevada spends at 1992 state government spending levels on a per capita inflation adjusted basis. The federal government can't say that. Most states can't say that. We have not grown our government since 1992, and that includes the tax reform of last session. We have the smallest number of state employees in the country on a per capita basis. We want to have a better education system. We want to have a better mental health system, a better health care system. We need roads, bridges, infrastructure here in this state. People want a great community to live in, and some of that costs money. That's just the reality of life. Yeah. But what we've done is try to balance the need to be fiscally prudent and protect small businesses and Nevada families with the idea that, hey, we've got to spend some money to improve these very important public services that the state provides here in Nevada.
Yeah. Kind of shifting to the issue of public lands, it's a big issue in Nevada. You voted for SJR 1 in the last session, which calls for the federal government to turn over 7.2 million acres of federal lands, largely on the I-80 corridor, lands that are what are called the so-called checkerboard lands. Do you think that the land turnover should stop there? Do you think that the federal government should turn over more land to the state?
Well, right now the federal government owns between 85 and 90% of the land within the borders of Nevada. I would like to see a process where it's much easier for Nevada to gain control over those lands. I'm not going to, I can't give you a specific percentage today, but I know here in Clark County, you talk about a checkerboard. It's been that way down here in Clark County forever. I'm a commercial real estate attorney. So over the years, I've represented lots of developers and businesses who want to develop in southern Nevada. And you constantly have to work with the BLM. You try to have to buy the property at auction or somehow get land transferred. Most states don't have to deal with this. And for our economic development here in southern Nevada, we need to be able to control much of that land here in southern Nevada.
Yeah. There are people, including Clive and Bundy, who say, look, the federal government has no legal claim to the lands that are in Clark County, and they should be either state or county lands. Have you looked at that? Do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that?
You know, I'm not a Clive and Bundy person. Clive and Bundy's a criminal, and so I'm going to steer away from, you know, the things Clive and Bundy says. But I will say that we do, I do believe that we need more of these lands in control of state government versus the federal government, whether it's state, county, local, but into Nevada hands.
Yeah. If you're elected, what would be the #1 thing? I mean, if you had to choose between all the issues and all the priorities that you might want to bring to Congress, what would be the one thing you would consider the most important, the first thing you're going to get to work on?
I think regulatory reform is a huge issue. Various studies estimate that over-regulation of businesses and individuals in this country at the federal level, at the executive department level, costs us about $2 trillion a year. And so,
give me some examples. Like, what would you?
Well, the EPA, you know, with the most recent inland waters regulation they passed, trying to really over-regulate farmers, other folks here in the state. Frankly, with regard to drainage ditches, you know, something as insignificant as of a waterway, a quote waterway, as that.
Trying to define that under the term navigable waters.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Dodd-Frank and the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, CFPB. You know, Dodd-Frank was implemented in theory to make sure that the large banks didn't do some of the things they'd done in the past, to make sure they, had proper oversight. But what's happened is Dodd-Frank is hurting small community banks who are the primary source of loans for small businesses, for residential mortgages. So it hurts our housing market. It hurts our small business community. I believe there's 19,000 pages of regulation and counting under Dodd-Frank. Then you have the Department of Energy.
But I mean, going back to Dodd-Frank, you still need protections in place, right? Obviously, because
the issue is over-regulation.
Okay.
I think that Congress needs to have more of a say in these regulations. I think there needs to be an analysis done of the cost to a regulation before the law that the regulation is tied to comes for a vote on the floor of the House.
Should the regulations come back before Congress for
I do.
approval?
That's the second thing I was going to say.
Okay.
I think regulations, major regulations, that have a big economic impact on our country, I think they should have to come back before Congress. You know, the executive branch has really, over the last few years, usurped the traditional constitutional role of Congress. And I think Congress needs to take that back.
Yeah.
And I think when you talk about the economic engine of this country, you know, we have $19 trillion in debt, and people say, how do you fix this debt problem? Part of the way you fix it is having better than 2% economic growth year over year. Part of the way you do that is to take these overburdensome regulations, these shackles, off the businesses in this country, let them operate somewhat, I don't want to say unfettered, but certainly unfettered from over-regulation, excessive regulation. So I think regulatory reform is a big deal.
Yeah. Immigration, you supported in the 2015 session a joint resolution talking about a comprehensive immigration reform bill. Do you think, first of all, that there should be a pathway to citizenship for people who have come here, who are here now illegally? Should they be able to become citizens eventually?
Well, first of all, we've got to secure our border.
Yeah.
We have to do that first. And that resolution you mentioned, every single member of the Senate voted for that 2 years in a row.
Right.
Even the most conservative, the most well-known conservatives in the legislature, like Don Gustafson and James Settlemeyer, voted for this. It was a non-binding resolution, and it said, secure the border first. And that's what we've got to do.
But after that, I mean, assuming the border's secure.
Once the people of this country are confident that our border is secure, then I think we need to determine how are we going to handle the issue of 12 million people here who are here illegally, without authorization. And what I would say about that is, number one, you're not going to deport 12 million people. That's just not going to happen.
Okay.
So you need to have a process. I think they need to get the back of the line. I think they need to pay a fine of some sort, back taxes, prove they can get a job, make sure they've not committed any crimes while they're here. If all of those things occur, then they can have a path to legal status.
Yeah. Now, when you say legal status, that means green card. That doesn't necessarily mean citizenship.
Yeah.
So you don't think citizenship?
I think legal status is the way to go.
Okay. With that exception, that sounds almost exactly like the comprehensive immigration reform bill that was passed by the Senate with a bipartisan majority. Senator Reid, Senator Heller both supported it. It went to the House. If there was a bill there that you thought was a good bill, and it was sitting in the House, but the leadership of the House wouldn't bring it up for a bill, that's what happened with that bill, what would you do? How would you handle that?
I think right now, without Congress acting on the issue of border security and immigration reform, we have de facto amnesty now. So I don't think there can be any excuses in either party going forward to not do something about this. I think we have to come up with a solution. You know, I feel about these issues very similar to how Senator Heller and Congressman Heck feel about these issues. I know Congressman Heck lamented and I think objected to House leadership when they would not bring up an immigration reform bill. So again, I think you have to do this in steps. The first thing you have to do is secure the border.
Yeah.
Okay.
What would you actually do though? I mean, Congressman Heck criticized the leadership in a statement, but he stopped short of signing a discharge petition to get the bill actually to the floor. Would you have signed that discharge petition? Would you have been more outspoken than he was? What could you do?
You know, I'm not really familiar with the specific instance you're talking about with regard to Congressman Heck, and I'm not going to second guess Congressman Heck. You're talking about hypotheticals now.
Yeah.
What I am saying is I am committed to being one of those folks who's going to be part of the governing wing of the Republican Party. I'm not going to be ruled by ideology. You know, I found over the last few years serving in the legislature, you can either be an ideologue or you can get things done, but you can't do both. And I want to get things done, and this is a problem we have to solve.
Yeah. You may be lonely in that governing wing of the Republican Party. Let me ask this: Donald Trump, he is going to be the nominee of the Republican Party. Do you support Donald Trump? Are you going to vote for him?
Well, you look at the options here. We have Donald Trump and probably Hillary Clinton. Now, I was a Marco Rubio supporter. I endorsed Marco Rubio, but I am going to support the nominee for the Republican Party. I do not want Hillary Clinton to be our president.
Okay.
But I'm going to focus on my race.
Yeah. Obviously, you know, you're going to focus on your race, but in the process of doing that, obviously the nominee of the Republican Party, the presidential candidate, is going to be at the top of the ticket. What impact do you think Trump is going to have on your race?
Don't know. You know, the polls that I've been seeing lately, both in battleground states around the country and national polls, show the race pretty close.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people have been wrong the last year or so, both political pundits and just, you know, politicians, as to what was going to happen. So I don't think anyone can predict what November is going to look like.
Your district is a fairly closely divided district.
Sure.
So no matter what, you are going to have to appeal to the middle, even to Democrats, as well as to Republicans in that district. Donald Trump may be adding to the Republican Party's numbers, but he's also alienating a lot of people.
Hillary Clinton is alienating a lot of people too.
But not as many as Donald Trump. And
well, you know, we're a polarized country, right?
We sure are.
We do need to find more common ground.
Yeah.
The question, I think, for most Americans is going to be, who can find more common ground? Who can bridge this gap and lead this country? And so it'll be a spirited campaign between now and November. There's not a lot I can do about that.
Yeah.
I've got to focus on my race and making sure that I do the best I can to represent the people of CD3.
Yeah. You're going to get a lot of, Michael Roberson, do you agree with Donald Trump when he says this? And it's going to be something outrageous. How do you handle that?
You know what? I'm going to talk about my race and my record. I'm very proud of my record. I think my record stands up well both in a primary and a general election in a very competitive district.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've had a tough race every time I've run because I've always run in a competitive district. Senate District 20, which I represent, is a microcosm of CD3. It's a 50-50 district. It has been since the first time I ran. In fact, it was a Democrat registration advantage district when I ran in 2010.
And a Democrat held the seat.
That's right.
The first time, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
But you know, you learn in politics, there are some things you can control and some things you can't. And so I'm focused on making sure we have a strong representative for Southern Nevada in Washington, and I think I'm that person.
There's a lot of the candidates who have come through here who have experience in the legislature tell me the same thing, and they say, you know, I'm running for Congress, but in the legislature we did things differently. We worked together more closely. It's a smaller body. People know each other a little bit better. There's a requirement to have a balanced budget. There's a lot of rules that kind of force you to have to come to some kind of compromise. In Congress, that's not the case. And you mentioned the polarization. If you go there, even with your record of trying to bridge some of these gaps, you're going to end up in Washington, D.C., there's going to be a lot of polarization. How are you going to overcome that? especially in the Nevada delegation. I mean, it could be 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats after this next election. So how do you overcome that, work with the other side in a environment where party leadership may not want you to do any of that?
Well, I am only one person of a body with 435 members. But until you start electing pragmatic, common sense people like I am, the system's never going to change. And it wasn't always like that. You know, I grew up in Kansas, moved to Nevada in 2000. When I grew up in Kansas, Bob Dole was my U.S. Senator.
Okay.
Well, you talked before about conservative and what that means. Well, Bob Dole was considered to be a conservative at the time by everyone. But that did not stop him from working with Ted Kennedy and other Democrats in the Senate, working with folks in the House to move the ball forward for this country, to do the right thing for this country, to find common ground.
Yeah.
Until we start electing more people that have that mindset, and I do, and I have a record that shows that I do, things aren't going to get better. But I'm an optimist,
But even
and
if
I'm
you
convinced.
even if you get elected, Nevada's 3rd district, evenly divided, gets a guy in there who wants to work with the other side. You still have gerrymandered districts all across the country that elect people for whom not only is it not a good idea, it's actually advantageous to not work with the other side and to be the ideologue that you talked about.
And Steve, you really hit the nail on the head there. One of the biggest problems we have in our current political system is the gerrymandering process. The way districts are drawn, there are very few districts like CD3, which is a very competitive district. To be successful in CD3, you have to appeal to a broad cross-section of folks in CD3. You can't be seen as an ideologue, either Republican or Democrat ideologue. You will not be successful. But that's not the case in a lot of these other districts, where the districts are drawn so that essentially the winner of that seat is happens in the primary, because it's either such a Republican district that a Democrat can never win, or it's such a Democrat district that a Republican can never win. And so the incentives at play are to be as conservative as you can or as liberal as you can, depending on the district. That's not good for our democracy. I think there needs to be a serious effort to reform how we draw districts in this country.
Yeah. Just a couple quick things. The I-11 project.
Big fan, big supporter of it.
Yeah.
I know one of my competitors came on your show and said that he would do nothing to help get I-11 here.
That is true.
I could not disagree more. That is vital to Southern Nevada. It's vital to jobs here in Southern Nevada. I will do everything I can to get I-11 built.
Okay. And really the key there is funding. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to agitate for more funding, because this really affects, although it affects the entire Canada-Mexico corridor, it's kind of seen in Washington as just an issue that affects like 2 states, Arizona and Nevada. And so how will you advocate to get funding for that project?
You know, infrastructure is important. And this used to be a country that valued spending money on infrastructure. We have got to pay for infrastructure. And, you know, that is something that's going to be important to me. We need to build up our infrastructure in this country. And certainly I-11 needs to be at the top of the list.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier you've been endorsed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
Something else that's been endorsed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is Yucca Mountain. What do you think about that project? Is there any way that you think Yucca Mountain could be authorized or could work as a construct?
I am opposed to Yucca Mountain as a storage site for nuclear waste, period.
Okay. So no compromise on that, and you would tell the U.S. Chamber that?
Well, sure. I mean, you know, just because you're endorsed by an organization doesn't mean that you agree with them on every issue. I'm a Nevadan first.
On the issue of abortion, this used to be considered a settled issue because of Roe versus Wade, but now with the divided Supreme Court that's short one member, and with the potential of a Republican presidential candidate who announced today some nominees who consider Roe v. Wade an ill-considered decision was arrived at and poorly reasoned, who might be in a position to overturn that. Do you think that should be settled the way it is, or do you think it should be changed?
Well, I am personally pro-life. I do believe in exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. You know, Roe v. Wade has been around for 43 years, 44 years. I think we need to focus on limiting abortions past a certain period of time. You know, there was legislation in Congress that would have said after 20 weeks that there's ample studies that show that, you know, the baby can feel the pain at 20 weeks or longer. To the extent that's the case, we need to make sure that we're limiting those instances where that can occur. I'm a pro-life guy. I doubt that Roe v. Wade will be overturned anytime soon. I do believe that states should have more of a say in that. Now, Nevada's law is clear on that.
Yeah.
Nevada, you know, is identical to the federal law as far as that goes.
And the voters weighed in on it at one point in the state.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, this is a tough issue, and I understand there are sincere people on both sides of this issue. All I can do is tell you what my personal position is.
What about the funding for Planned Parenthood? They do provide abortions with a small percentage of that, but they also provide health care options to thousands of women across the country. That's the majority of the work that they do. Should they be defunded? Should you increase the funding? Well, how should the federal government?
I don't think the government should be funding Planned Parenthood.
At all.
There are other resources available that the government either can or would fund. But it's so long as Planned Parenthood is performing abortions, I do not think the federal government should be funding the organization.
So if they did not do that, your stance might be different on providing funding for them?
If they didn't perform abortions, my stance would be different.
But as long as they're doing that, no funding as far as you're concerned?
That's my opinion, yes.
Okay, sounds good. Michael Roberson, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it, and hopefully you'll come back in the future and talk to us more.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.